Welcome back to the Honda Odyssey RB1 Chinese head unit installation part 2. I managed to leave out quite a bit of information in video 1, so hopefully I will try to cover off a little bit more of that for you. So the model I bought was called Strong Nav, and I bought that off AliExpress in China. It came complete with the new plastic surround already fitted. So this here is the old plastic surround. There appears to be quite a few models that are slightly different, but they seem to be sharing quite a few of the same components. I would probably recommend not go for the low end one, which I did, which I'd have to say is actually working really well. The only problem is its boot up time is quite slow. It would probably be nice if you go for at least a 2 gig of RAM. I went for the 1 gig of RAM just because I wasn't sure whether I was wasting my money on it or not. Very happy with it. You won't be wasting your money, so go up for the sake of probably $10–20. It's worth going to the next model up. I actually found that the plastic surrounds, although they're slightly different as in where the tabs are, they still fitted in nicely. In fact, they fitted in quite well, so no worries about the colour and the fitment. So I'd go with that. I was quite happy to replace mine because, as you can actually see, it looks like there's a bit of a cigarette burn on there, which bugged me for quite a while, so it was quite nice getting rid of that. So you'll find with the Honda Odyssey RB1s that they've got their main head unit, which is mounted down the bottom with quite a selection of plugs and pinouts there, but they also have the display unit, which actually does have some smarts, and the clock is driven from this display unit here. So if you intend removing that display unit, you'll lose your clock, which will become a bit of dead space. I personally had considered actually modifying that, and I had taken this plastic front off, and you could do it, but because it's old plastic, I suspect you will have a nightmare trying to cut or modify it. Chances are it's going to split, so you're better off going for the unit with the complete surround. It'll just drop straight into place and it'll be a lot easier. You won't end up with a silly clock on the side. Now what you might find, I found that the harness that was supplied with the Chinese head unit didn't actually have half the wires that I needed that were actually wired into it. So looking at the plug, it's very close to an ISO unit. So I had a harness for another stereo, which was a JVC. All I wanted was the ISO plug. In actual fact, all I wanted was the pins, so I ended up cutting it apart with a pair of side cutters. Do it nice and carefully, and you can actually pull the pins out the side. You can actually remove the pins if you're very careful by putting a sharp pointy object down there and pulling the pins out, but it's so difficult, you'll get highly frustrated. So it's easier just to use a pair of side cutters, cut the plug apart, and you'll have the pins there. They will actually slide straight into your existing Chinese harness. The plug is so similar to the ISO plug, the pins fit in and they work quite well. These harnesses aren't expensive, so it's well worth it. So I think the most useful piece of information I can give for you at the moment is actually how to understand the circuit diagram in the vehicle, so you can follow it all through yourself. Once you understand that, it's actually pretty straightforward. So if you look at my diagram that I've put up on Pinterest, I have included these little notes on it so you can actually find out which one goes where. But you'll see, for example, on the nav unit, because it's got multiple plugs on it, if you have a look close, you'll actually see each one of those plugs is actually labelled on the nav unit. You'll see here where there's a break, that's the nav unit carrying on, and that's just showing it's easier to run a wire rather than showing it connecting to the nav unit. There you can see your audio amplifier, which is underneath the seat, so you can follow all the plugs on that. The outputs, so there's actually two different plugs on the audio amplifier, as you will have seen in the first video. So you should be able to see the larger plug goes out to the speakers, and the smaller 14-pin plug goes back to the preamp in the nav unit. Now the other portion that is probably of interest is this part here, which is the steering wheel controls. You notice that they have a little triangle here, and I've labelled this one with a number 1, for example. So what that means is you can actually find where that comes from elsewhere on the diagram. So I've actually already marked that one. That one goes to what is the nav display unit, and you can see I've marked that with a number 1 there. So that is an output from that plug, comes into the steering wheel control number 1, goes through the resistors, each button has a different resistor, comes out on output number 3. If you look back here, you can find output number, which is an input number 3, and that comes into this diagram, and you can actually see, so those are your pin 8 and your pin 24s that I've mentioned multiple times, and that tells you that your pin 8 is your ground. So hopefully that will help you understand the diagram. What I've done is, the diagram's quite small, so anything I'm working on in particular I've just blown up that section, and it just makes it easier to work with. And if you tie it in with that diagram, you should be able to find where every single plug goes and every pin out. These sheets are also on Pinterest, and I've marked in red the ones which are of interest, particularly if you're using a reversing camera and you need to have a signal to make your reversing camera work. I actually bought a new reversing camera which I'm not using. I've actually found the existing reversing camera works really well, but I did connect it to 12 volts. It was running on 7.1 volts. Connecting it to 12 volts made it work way better. The picture actually got nice and clean. So what I did on the reversing camera is actually connect to the reverse light. So that's how I'm actually turning my reversing camera on, using the reversing light, and it provides the 12 volts. And I haven't needed the new camera, which is actually was just a waste of money. So you could probably avoid that if you've got your own camera already. So I thought I'd make a recommendation about what you do with the gap when you remove the nav unit. It weighs about almost 3 kgs, so it's quite a lump of steel to be still sitting in there that you don't need to have. Unfortunately, it's a bit of an unusual size. Look, if I put a standard, that's a standard DIN pocket beside, you can see it's actually way too small for the gap. So if you actually remove the nav unit, you're going to have quite a gaping hole. So what I've done is just take the front of the stereo. You can actually remove the front of that. There's about 4 screws and a little spring for the flap on the front. What I've done is I've actually done away with the spring and actually forced that lid closed so it doesn't open anymore. It just clips straight onto the plastic frame and fills the gap nicely. It's a useless bit of plastic, but the car's full of useless bits of plastic, so it doesn't really matter. And I don't really need another pocket in there anyway, so that's working out quite well for me.